Benchmark, the voice of business. Presented by LMD.
On this edition of Benchmark, FAO Sri Lanka is under the spotlight as we welcome to our studio Beth Crawford, the FAO representative for Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and Kiran Echen, country manager of TNS Lanka, analyzes TNS's nationwide survey on provincial council elections. That's the lineup for Benchmark.
Hello and welcome to Benchmark. I'm Savitri Rodrigo. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations established a representative office in Colombo, about 30 years ago. And in those last 3 decades, the FAO has taken on numerous projects from emergency relief and rehabilitation to capacity building and offering technical assistance. To tell us more about the FAO, its role here in Sri Lanka, and also other pertinent issues that might interest you and me, is Beth Crawford, the FAO's representative for Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Welcome, Beth. Lovely to have you in our studios.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You know, you've been here 9 months now. What are your first impressions of post-war Sri Lanka?
My first impressions are of a country that's making rapid strides to recover from the long conflict that it's gone through. If I travel up in the north and the east, the amount of rebuilding, resettlement is quite remarkable. In the 9 months that I've been here, even things like the infrastructure, the roads, I've seen a lot of changes in development, new roads opening. Colombo is obviously a thriving city with new stores, restaurants opening all the time. It's obviously a beautiful country, so I also see the booming tourism industry. So I see a country that's made a lot of strides forward and has a huge potential to develop further.
The FAO in Sri Lanka has assisted, I think you have projects in resettling populations in the north and east in those provinces with livelihood support and technical cooperation projects in the agriculture, fisheries and livestock sectors. So, but if you look at everything in an overall context from a macro picture, what are the key focus areas that FAO has in partnership with Sri Lanka?
Our key focus areas in partnership with Sri Lanka are, I would say, focusing really on 3 main areas. One is food security and nutrition. Another is improving rural livelihoods. And a third one is really looking at the sustainable aspect of agricultural production, ensuring that we're making the best use of our natural resources, and also that we are learning how to adapt to things like climate change and the impacts that will come with that. So everything we do in the country is focused on the priority areas of the government, and it's also at the request of the government. And I think, as you mentioned, we're a technical agency of the United Nations, so our main input is really technical assistance, knowledge sharing, information. And a lot of the projects that we do on the ground are with other donor support. So we have other resource partners, development partners that we work with as well. So to give a few examples, one area that we are working on is the dairy development. As you may know, the government wishes to become self-sufficient in dairy over the next few years. And we're actually seeing all over Asia that as incomes rise, that the demand for staple foods, so rice, wheat, tubers, that demand remains stable, while the demand for non-staple foods, meat, dairy, vegetables, fruits, that rises. So dairy is a good area of focus. And what we're doing is seeing how we can improve the milk production by both focusing on improving the breed of the cattle and on improving the feeding techniques. Another example is we have a groundnut project where we're looking at groundnut cultivation and seed production. Again, the government has asked us to focus on other field crops, so not paddy, but others, to see how we can develop those sectors. Now, groundnut is a great crop because it's relatively drought resistant. It provides a good income to the farmers, and it's nutritious. So it's a type of crop that we're looking to help develop through appropriate seed production, etc.
Interesting. You've done quite a few visits to the north and east. And of course, those communities are living now post-war. How would you assess the present living conditions of these communities?
When I travel to the north and the east, I am struck by the amount of rehabilitation, rebuilding that has happened. I mean, everywhere you see new roads, new houses, new schools. FAO was very active in these past years in helping to rebuild the agricultural livelihoods. So we focused on things like providing seeds to the resettled families, also livestock distribution, cattle or goats, also poultry, home gardens. So I think a lot of these basic needs have been met. I think where more work needs to be done is to ensure that these livelihoods are also sustainable and resilient. Because if we see things, for example, like the recent drought, you know, the past Maha season had maybe half the rainfall that it would have normally had. And we need to make sure that the livelihoods are strong enough to be able to recover and to move on from these types of shocks that are likely to become more common as we move ahead and we have climate change type impacts.
What areas do you think would need more support in this region?
In the north and the east? Well, one thing I should mention is that the United Nations, in partnership with the government, is actually just undertaking now a joint needs assessment. So they will be looking at what are the residual needs and areas of focus. So I don't want to, preempt what might come out of that study. But in our areas, what we're really looking at are things like diversified livelihoods, so that farmers do more than only focus, for example, on paddy, that they focus on other crops, like I was just mentioning, that we look at other seed varieties that are resistant maybe to droughts and to floods, that we look at market linkages. These things are actually important, of course, for the whole country. But these are all the types of things that can help the rural communities improve their livelihoods and get a more stable footing to move forward.
But from time immemorial, this country has been an agricultural-based economy. But of course, over centuries, due to development, climate change, various other practices coming in, we have seen various changes in the actual base of the economy. What are your thoughts when you look at our agricultural systems? What are your thoughts on these systems that are found here in the island?
Well, if I look at some systems, let's say, for example, the irrigation system here, I think that's a remarkable system that through the water tank management, something that's an ancient system and is being used to this day to ensure agricultural development. So there are things like this that are remarkable. Of course, though, when we talk about an agricultural system or a food system, we're really talking about all aspects of the food chain, the value chain, from the producer through to the consumer. So if I look at it from that point of view, one thing FAO always says is healthy people depend on healthy food systems. And I think here in Sri Lanka, one area where we could focus and do more is on the post-harvest management. We see that up to about 40% of harvests of produce are lost post-harvest. This can be due to a number of things. One area to look at is to ensure that what farmers are growing, that there's also a market for that produce. Then we need to make sure that we have the roads to the markets, that we have the information systems to give the right data information about the markets. Of course, also storage, processing. All of these are areas that could be further developed to help reduce that food loss. And I should say that food loss and food waste, which happens at the end of the value chain, once the food has made it to the consumer or the restaurant or the store and is wasted at that point, food loss and food waste are global problems that we're trying to focus on.
Sri Lanka is ranked joint 60th with Vietnam in the Global Food Security Index for 2013. This is out of 107 countries, and we've climbed 4 places. But from the FAO's perspective, how do you rate Sri Lanka in terms of food security?
Sri Lanka is moderately food secure, but we do still see approximately 20% of undernourishment in the country. And FAO's goal is, of course, to get that to 0%. Food security really depends on a number of issues. We have to make sure that people have the right access to food, so that's both physical access and also access from a monetary point of view, that they can afford to buy the foods that they need. that there's good nutrition information so that people understand what constitutes a healthy diet. And we also clearly see there's a very clear connection between rising incomes and rising food security. They go hand in hand. So we also always want to look at improving farm profitability and also improving competitiveness. You want to have both of those elements. If you have only farm profitability, for example, through trade barriers without competitiveness, then that hurts the consumers because they'll be paying more for their food, and we want to ensure that people can buy the right foods, that they can afford the right foods. If you have competitiveness without farm profitability, farmers will soon be moving into other areas. So we want to keep those two working together in a healthy way to improve incomes, profitabilities, and eventually food security.
So Beth, maintaining that equation of farm profitability and competitiveness is ultra important.
It's very important, yes.
So we're going to take a short commercial break. When we return, Beth Crawford will discuss the nexus between poverty alleviation and agricultural development and how Sri Lanka's fisheries sector can actually increase its contribution to the economy. Stay with us.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
Free your mind of stress and worry with a Shanti Home Loan from HNB. Shanti Home Loans from HNB. Peace of mind with the house you have in mind.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
Thank you for staying with Benchmark, the Big Picture Business Program. We are back with our discussion that we've been having with Beth Crawford, the FAO's representative for Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Beth, just can you expand a little bit on the nexus between poverty alleviation and agricultural development, especially here in Sri Lanka's context?
Here in Sri Lanka, that nexus is extremely important. As you may know, about 70% of the population lives in rural areas and depends on agriculture for their livelihoods. So we see very clearly a link there between poverty alleviation and agricultural development. We focus on 3 areas for agricultural development. One is that we need to invest in agricultural research and development so that we can ensure that farmers can continue to increase their productivity at lower costs. Another important area is to invest in infrastructure. That's both roads and also the communication technologies, so that those market linkages, both physical and through information and data sharing, are fully developed. And a third area that we see as important is also to invest in healthcare and schools, education in the rural areas, so that we can make sure that farmers, both today and in future generations, can remain productive.
You know, in February, Beth, the health authorities directed a ban on all forms of meat amid this outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease which spread across 5 districts. Does Sri Lanka really need to be wary of the spread of animal disease?
Sri Lanka needs to be wary of the spread of animal disease, I think just like any other country. Sri Lanka is doing a lot, for example, because a lot of these spreads of animal diseases and pests are also transboundary. So it's also not just Sri Lanka, but they need to be working together with their neighbors. So Sri Lanka is part of the SARC, of course, and there also through FAOs, with FAO's guidance, Sri Lanka is active in regional policies and practices to monitor and control these pests and diseases. Sri Lanka also monitors migratory bird patterns, poultry, and then here in the country they react when there are things like this recent outbreak of the foot and mouth disease. We're actually working with the government on that to see if we can help provide some additional vaccines that are necessary right now, because the vaccine production for foot and mouth disease isn't keeping up with the current demand. So yes, they need to be wary and have the right policies in place, but I think Sri Lanka is doing a good job in that area. And another thing that is as an advantage to Sri Lanka is that it's an island, and an island provides a natural barrier to some degree from these transboundary pests and diseases. And so, for example, our FAO experts in the field of foot and mouth disease believe that Sri Lanka is in a good position to actually fully eradicate foot and mouth disease. So we hope to also work with the government on that to develop a plan for the full eradication of foot and mouth disease here in the country.
Just expand a little bit more on the FAO's role in actually combating these diseases.
FAO's role is really, a lot of their role is information sharing. So we have a lot of early warning systems, data collection. We work with regional groups to make sure that the right policies are in place across the boundaries. We also have the latest information on the right types of vaccines and treatments when such diseases break out. So it's really, I'd say, both a combination of knowledge sharing, policy making, and actual treatment programs.
The fisheries sector, Beth, is one of those sectors that tends to fall by the wayside. Somehow they don't seem to get as much support as maybe the paddy cultivation or other agricultural areas. How much more push does the fisheries sector need to contribute sustainably and productively to the economy, and also to uplift their livelihoods the way things are, because they need to battle the vagaries of the weather, which is quite something.
Yes, of course. Now, fisheries, of course, always has been and will continue to be an important aspect of the Sri Lankan economy. We also believe that fisheries plays a big role in food security and will continue to play a big role in that area. Here in Sri Lanka, the government has asked us to focus in particular on aquaculture, so inland fisheries and aquaculture. And we're actually seeing across Asia that this is an area that's being developed quite rapidly and has a lot of potential for growth. Currently, I think approximately 85% of fish produce comes from marine fishing, so from the open waters fisheries, but we're trying to develop this other area which can provide additional livelihoods to farmers, which is a sustainable way that we can produce fish, and is a good area for development. Another area for both inland fisheries and open water fisheries is, again, this post-harvest management. I think if we focused on that, it could help to contribute to the income and the livelihoods of the fishers who depend on this. Again, because we see quite a lot of waste post-harvest, so we need to have proper storage, cold storage, the proper transportation to markets, et cetera, to limit that loss. Now, if we're looking at open water marine fishing, a lot of debate, of course, is currently going on how can we move forward in a way that we're going to be protecting our oceans so that also future generations will be able to use the oceans for their livelihoods. You might have heard of blue growth, which looks at the sustainable management and conservation of the oceans, and also looks at how to ensure that the livelihoods of the communities that depend on fisheries will be able to continue. The risks, the main risks facing the oceans right now are overfishing, habitat degradation, and pollution. And that's in addition to the impacts of climate change. So anything we do in that area really needs to take these aspects into consideration. And again, Sri Lanka is working, is involved in regional discussions on these issues.
Well, speaking of climate change and environmental sustainability, is enough being done to protect the environment and our forest resources here?
I don't think we can say yet that enough is being done. I don't think there's probably a country in the world that can say already that they're doing enough. The environment will continue to have increasing pressures placed upon it. Climate change will have effects that we can only sort of anticipate now, that we're still not fully aware of. So a lot of focus needs to be on that. And more can and should be done also here in Sri Lanka. That having been said, Sri Lanka does have various good practices and attempts in place already. For example, we have here a UN RED program, which looks at reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So that's a program with 3 UN agencies, FAO, UNDP, and UNEP, the Environment Program, and under the leadership of the Ministry of Environment, but with many stakeholders involved. So these are excellent programs to think through what are all the pressures on our forest resources, who is putting what type of pressures on for what reason, and how can we make sure that we manage these in a sustainable manner to ensure that we reduce emissions from deforestation, et cetera. We're also working on a project, again, that the government has asked us to look into at the sustainable or the safe use of pesticides. This, of course, is not only an environmental issue, but also a health issue. The safe use of pesticides and also the safe disposal of pesticide containers. This has been an issue here in Sri Lanka.
So we've been chatting with Beth Crawford, the FAO's representative for Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and we've been discussing a host of issues including food security, agricultural development and sustainability of such, as well as malnutrition and other related areas. On the other side, telling you about the TNS survey is Kiran Echen, Country Manager of TNS Lanka.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
Free your mind of stress and worry with a Shanti Home Loan from HNB. Shanti Home Loans from HNB. Peace of mind with the house you have in mind.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
of stress and worry with a Shanti Home Loan from HNB. Shanti Home Loans from HNB. Peace of mind with the house you have in mind.
Welcome back to Benchmark. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. We now take a closer look at the latest LNB TNS survey with the country manager of TNS Lanka, Kiran Echen. Now, Kiran, could you enlighten us on the subject matter of this survey, please?
This month, we focused on the recently held provincial elections that happened in March. There was a lot of hype about it, so we went to the public and asked them what they thought about the election process per se, about the candidates, about the expenditure, was it justified, etc.
In this context, how important is the provincial council system in Sri Lanka?
Not surprisingly, Anushan, majority feel it is indeed important. Close to 70% of our sample feel that provincial council system is important for our country. And why not? I mean, it brings the focus of social and economic development to my province, my area, which perhaps a centralized government might not be able to. So majority do feel so. But the way I see it, Anushan, is like this. There are still 3 out of 10 people, 30%, who are either not sure whether it's working or whether it's important, and close to 20% who are within this 30% who believe that it is not important or it's not needed. And they are mainly coming from upcountry outside of Colombo and people who are in their late 40s and 50s. So perhaps the people who have seen the era before the provincial council system, and perhaps they are asking the question, is it indeed delivering? We don't know yet.
How do respondents feel, Kiran, about the expenditure incurred during election campaigns? 53%
of our respondents, Anushan, felt that the expenses related to this election process is not reasonable. Now, close to another 1/4 of the sample frankly admit that I don't have an idea, which is only fair, and only 1 out of 5 respondents feel that this expense is justified. It is a necessary expense and should not be avoided, cannot be avoided and should not be avoided. See, now we should, just to put this into perspective, we should remember that people don't have an idea, or most people don't have an idea of how much exactly was the expenses and what was the load on the exchequer. But the general opinion by and large is that is this expense justifiable, or are we spending a bit too much? Shouldn't it be diverted to things that are more urgent and necessary as far as the public is concerned?
What do they have to say about the candidates that are being put forward by the various political parties?
Now, we asked in our survey, Anushan, what they thought about the candidates and do they think they are of high caliber. Only 13% of the respondents felt that the candidates were indeed of high caliber. Only 13%. Now, another 40% actually believe that they are not of good caliber, but the overwhelming response, close to half of them, 48% to be exact, actually say that I don't know. Now, if you put these two together, it's close to almost 9 out of 10 people. Now, this is showing us 2 or 3 very clear but dangerous things that are happening out there. First of all, I think the entire machinery of the parties as well as the candidates, I don't think they are doing enough to reach out and connect with the electorate. The extent to which they are talking about who the candidates are, the candidates talking about themselves, their qualifications, what is their manifesto, what benefits are they likely to bring to the common man who is going to vote for them and bring them to power. I don't think that is anywhere in the vicinity of being sufficient. Okay, so the second aspect that is very glaring, if you take it to the public, is that there is a lot of public apathy. There is one of the reasons why they don't know who the candidates are is they are indifferent. I don't care who comes into power, I don't care. So that is when you don't know about the candidates, and when combined with the general cynicism that's prevailing these days, it is a very dangerous concoction. But the message is loud and clear, Anushan, that at least in the forthcoming elections, there is a need for the candidates to reach out better, to connect with the voters, and particularly with the cynical and indifferent voters.
That was the country manager of TNS Lanka, Kiran Echen. That's all we have for you on this edition of Benchmark. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again next time.